Today you will learn how to take a simple card design and step it up to create 2 new card designs. Stepping up your cards is a great way to use your card designs over and over again without having to come up with new ideas. Hi, it's Lynn Dunn from Stamptastic Designs. Thanks so much for joining me. In this episode of Stamptastic TV, you will learn how to take one card design and then with a few modifications, step it up to create 2 more cards that have a slightly different look. And one of the cards featured today is a fun fold design called a Z-fold card. Now you will also learn a fun and simple way to add color to your stamped images using some Stampin' Up sponge daubers. Now the projects featured today showcase the Stampin' Up Daisy Lane stamp set. However, keep in mind that you can use the measurements provided in this video with any stamp set or pattern papers that you have on hand. Just get creative with it. By the end of this video, you will have 3 different card designs created with the Daisy Lane stamp set and using the Step It Up technique. For the latest card making ideas, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on that little bell so you will be notified each time I upload a new video. Now, if you've been following along with me, you know that last week I had the initial video on my catalog launch party. So today is video number 2 as it relates to the catalog launch party. And of course, there is a prize involved today. So today, since I'm featuring the Daisy Lane stamp set, that is going to be the prize that I'm giving away. So to enter the drawing, simply leave me a comment below this video. That's it. Okay, so first let's talk about the supplies you will need to create these cards. You will need some old olive cardstock for the base of your cards and some white cardstock for the accent pieces. We will also be using some pattern paper for these cards, so I am using some of the old olive pattern papers from the Regal's Designer Series paper pack. And of course, I am using the new Daisy Lane stamp set. Now, I am also using some of the stitched rectangular shape framelits, but I will supply you with the measurements. If you don't have these dies, you'll be able to cut out the rectangular shapes by hand. You will also need some ink. So for these cards, I will be using Old Olive, Daffodil Delight, and Pumpkin Pie. Now I will also be teaching you a little coloring technique. So you will need a little sponge dauber to do this technique. And then to embellish the cards, I'm using a bit of linen thread and some pearls. All right, I think that's it. Let's get started. Okay, so to start with the Step It Up technique, you need actually a card design to work with. So the very first card we are going to create is going to be the base design that we will use to create the other 2 cards. So to create this first card, you're going to start with a piece of old olive cardstock cut at 5.5 by 8.5 inches. Score the 8.5 inch side at 4 1/4 inches to create the base of your card. Next, cut a 5 1/4 by 4 inch piece of white cardstock. Cut a 2 by 4 inch piece of one of the old olive pattern papers and adhere it across the center of the white cardstock. Stamp a greeting on the lower right hand side of the white cardstock using old olive ink. Next, adhere the white cardstock to the old olive card front and set this aside. Now we're going to create the focal point for our card. So start by cutting a 1 by 5 1/8 by 3 3/4 inch piece of white cardstock. Now you can also use one of the rectangular stitched framelits to cut out this shape. Ink up the small daisy image with some Daffodil Delight ink. Grab a sponge dauber and ink it up with some pumpkin pie ink. Then dab the center of the daisy right on the stamp, and then lightly dab the ink around the edges of the daisy stamp. Then go ahead and stamp the flower on the upper part of the white rectangular shape. Now ink up the stem with some old olive ink. Stamp it just under the daisy. Now note the bottom part of the stem will not be stamped on the white paper, so be sure to have some kind of scrap paper underneath to catch the ink. So there you go. Now you have a daisy that is two-toned in color. You have the pumpkin pie in the center and a little bit around the edges. Pretty cool, hey? Now adhere the rectangular shape with the daisy to the center of the card front using a few dimensionals. For the finishing touch, simply embellish it with a few pearls. Now that we have the first card created, let's modify the design to create 2 more cards. Now, just a reminder, as part of my new catalog launch party, I'm giving away something every week during the month of June. So to be entered in the prize drawing, don't forget to leave a comment below. Now for the second card, we're going to take that same simple card design and step it up a little bit by making some modifications. So again, we're going to start with a piece of old olive cardstock cut at 5.5 by 8.5 inches. Score the 8.5 inch side at 4.25 inches to create the base of your card. Cut a 5.25 by 4 inch piece of white cardstock. This time we're going to change the size and orientation of our pattern paper. So you're going to be cutting a 1.5 by 5.25 inch piece of one of the old olive pattern papers and adhering it across the left side of the white cardstock. Stamp a greeting on the lower right hand side of the white cardstock using old olive ink. Now we're going to wrap a bit of linen thread around the white cardstock so that it goes across the pattern paper. So wrap the linen thread around there a couple of times and then tie it into a pretty bow. Now go ahead and adhere the white cardstock to the old olive card front and set this aside. Now we're going to create the same focal point that we created on the first card, but we're going to step it up just a little bit. So start with a 1 5/8 by 3 3/4 inch piece of white cardstock. You can also use one of the rectangular stitched framelits to cut out this shape. Ink up the small daisy image with some Daffodil Delight ink. Grab a sponge dauber, ink it up with some pumpkin pie ink, and dab the center of the daisy. Then lightly dab the ink around the edges of the flower. Now go ahead and stamp the flower on the upper part of the white rectangular shape. On a scrap piece of white cardstock, create another daisy, except this time we are going to cut the daisy image out by hand and use it as a little embellishment. Ink up the stem with some old olive ink and stamp it just under the daisy. Note that the bottom part of the stem will not be stamped on the white paper, so be sure to have that scrap piece of paper underneath. Adhere the rectangular shape with the daisy to the center of the card front using a few dimensionals. Adhere the second daisy image so that it overlaps the first one to create a small bouquet of daisies. For the finishing touch, simply embellish the card with a few pearls. All right, there you go. Now you have 2 daisy cards that were created simply by modifying the design of this first card. For more daisy cards created with the Step It Up technique, you can click on the link that is featured at the top of your screen. Okay, and for this last card, we are going to take that same simple card design, that very first card we made, and we're going to step it up by making a fun fold card. So start with a piece of old olive cardstock cut at 5.5 by 8.5 inches. Score the 8.5 inch side at 2 1/8 and 4.25 inches to create the base of your card. Fold the card in half at the 4.25 inch score line. Fold the 2 1/8 inch score line back on top of itself to create the Z fold. Now let's decorate it. Cut a 1 7/8 by 5.25 inch piece of one of the old olive pattern papers and adhere it across the flap of the Z fold card. Cut a 5.25 by 4 inch piece of white cardstock. Stamp a greeting on the lower right hand side of the white cardstock using old olive ink. Adhere the white cardstock to the inside of the Z fold card and set aside. Next, you will create the same focal point that you created for card number 2. So start with a 1 5/8 by 3 3/4 inch piece of white cardstock. You can also use one of the rectangular stitched framelits to cut out this shape. Ink up the small daisy image with some Daffodil Delight ink. Grab a sponge dauber and ink it up with some pumpkin pie ink and dab the center of the daisy. Then lightly dab the ink around the edges of the daisy stamp. Now go ahead and stamp the flower on the upper part of the white rectangular shape. On a scrap piece of white cardstock, create another daisy and cut it out by hand again. Ink up the stem with some old olive ink, stamp it just under the daisy. Adhere the left side of the rectangular shape, the one with the daisy, to the flap of the Z fold card using a few dimensionals. Now be sure to only put dimensionals or adhesive on the left side of the rectangular piece. The right side of this rectangular piece will hang over onto the white cardstock that you placed on the inside of the Z-fold card. Adhere the second daisy image overlapping the first one to create that little bouquet. Now for the finishing touch, simply embellish with a few pearls and a little bit of linen thread tied into a bow. All right, there you go. Now you have 3 daisy card ideas that were created simply by modifying the design of the very first card that I showed you today. And if you enjoyed these cards, feel free to download the printable tutorial. You can find the link in the description below this video. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by liking it and sharing it with your friends. And leave a comment below to let me know what you enjoyed most about the video and the cards shared here today. Have fun getting creative, take care, and I'll see you soon.